Fans, this is Kris Kloss welcoming you all to another episode of Xtreme Memories right here, hey, on the Wrestling Chatter YouTube channel. If you haven't done so, what are you waiting for? Like, share, comment, and subscribe. The more great subscribers we get, the more great content we can bring to you. Now, in this episode, one of the greats as far as donning the stripes, or maybe back in the 80s, the powder blue shirt with the buttons and the black bow tie. The guy's a referee. His name is Eric Melikian. Now, Melikian goes back all the way to the early days of XPW as a fan, getting a start in the business, paying his dues, ring crew, security, you name it. And then Melikian became an integral part, not only in the XPW 2.0 Cold Day in Hell era as a referee, but also behind the scenes. We talk a lot about that. Very interesting, getting his perspective on how things kind of unfolded behind the scenes, his start, his involvement in pro wrestling, XPW. And we also morph into the spin-off, if you will, MEXPro, MEXPW. He was very involved in that. And of course, we talk about what's in the news today, XPW 3.0 a little bit. This is Eric Melikian, referee extraordinaire, as a guest right here on Xtreme Memories, in which you can see on the 15th and the 30th of every single month right here on the Wrestling Chatter YouTube channel. Subscribe today. Enjoy Xtreme Memories. Wow, Xtreme Memories. Hey, welcome, referee extraordinaire. Oh, tell you what, man, Eric Melikian, welcome to Xtreme Memories.
Hey, thank you for having me, buddy. I really appreciate it. It's my pleasure.
Pleasure's all ours, buddy. And we'll get into everything XPW. You and I, post XPW original and pre Cold Day in Hell, became very good friends. And of course, look, man, this show, as we've talked to a lot of people that have been guests on this show is about XPW 1.0, you know. But we can't escape the fact that XPW, I'll call it 3.0, is here. Like, you know, it could be argued that XPW 2.0 was Cold Day in Hell, the 10-year anniversary. And then we'll also get into Eric MEXPW, which was basically a spin-off of XPW 2.0, and then that became MEXPro. And we talked a lot about this with a guy that you and I both know, who was basically the guy spearheading all that, Mike Hartsfield. But you were a big part of that too, not just as a referee, but behind the scenes. So we'll get into that. But Eric Melikian, welcome. Mm-hmm. Welcome to Xtreme Memories, my friend. And let me kick it off here and ask you, what was your first exposure to XPW before you got involved in wrestling as a fan?
First exposure to XPW, I'd say it was probably late 99. I had ran across online through, pre-SoCal Uncensored, there was another SoCal wrestling site back in the day that started covering XPW. I think they were a little biased against XPW, to be quite honest with you. So I kind of looked into it and I'm like, okay, this is interesting. It's a little different from what everyone else is doing, and I dug it. It's just like, you know, it seemed to be a lot more polished in some ways in the presentation. It still had that grittiness, but it seemed more polished than what a lot of other people were doing in Southern California.
Okay, and so this was before XPW, then you were aware of it before it hit television, because it hit television March or April of 2000. I want to say April of 2000. Right. Hey, that's kind of interesting. I just realized right now, you know, XPW, like I said, XPW, this Xtreme Memory show is all about the original XPW, but we can't escape what's going on in the wrestling news world, and XPW 3.0 is a big part of that. Of course, everyone knows that there was a show out in New York, Rebirth, and but there's going to be a show in Los Angeles, as already announced, April 9th. So that's kind of ironic now that we just said the birth of XPW on television was in April of 2000. So it's interesting how this XPW returning to LA with Rob Black is in April. You know, it would be very interesting to find out the date, because I don't know it off the top of my head. But what was the day? If any fans out there know it, be sure to feel free to drop it in the comments. When did XPW TV actually debut on television? It was in April of 2000. It would be interesting if it was the same day, right? But yeah. But anyway, just a side thought right there, out loud. Okay, so you, Melikian, you were how old at this point? Because I'm a little older than you, and I was pretty young starting up in XPW.
I would say I was, right about 16 at the time.
Okay, that's about right. I think we're about 7 years apart. So
7 years.
Yeah. So okay, so you were a fan then. And when did you start liking pro wrestling? If I'm not mistaken, you grew up in LA and the South Bay primarily. We'll get into
Redondo Beach.
Yeah, we'll get into that. It's very interesting is why you were kind of instrumental in Cold Day in Hell happening the way it did, but more specifically where it did, the location. But when did you start liking and getting into pro wrestling? Because you grew up in LA. I want to say you, along with myself, you attended the LA Sports Arena for house shows and WrestleMania 7, which I did too. When did you start liking it, and how did the wrestling bug? When did you get infected by that bug, if you will?
I would say it was right around WrestleMania 5 in 1989 when the mega powers exploded between, Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage. It just caught my attention, and from there on out, my parents, everyone around me thought it was just going to be a phase, but it hung on for life.
Yeah, I think we could all kind of relate to that. Did you? So how many shows would you say you attended as a fan? So okay, we could skip ahead because I don't know if you know the number of shows, but you went to a lot of LA Sports Arena house shows, WrestleMania 7. Frequented.
I could say maybe 6 or 7 house shows at LA Sports Arena before they went to the Arrowhead Pond.
And then WCW, you did a lot of that, the Forum.
Yeah, they went there. I think I went to the WCW shows at the Great Western Forum maybe twice before they stopped running.
There you go. Great Western Forum. But
that's awesome.
Yeah, but how many did you attend XPW shows as a fan before we get into them?
Yeah, of course I did. I started attending shows right around the time you guys started airing on TV on KJLA. So I went to the first show over at the LA Sports Arena when Pogo the Clown and Tool debuted, and that's when I really started getting familiar with everybody, even though I knew a little bit before then.
So how was that experience for you as a fan? I've asked a lot of guys that were a part of XPW at that time. You weren't a part of it yet, but how was that being an Angelino, the history of pro wrestling from what you knew and I knew from our age group? We're a little too young to kind of go back to the days of the Grand Olympic, but as an Angelino growing up and going to all those shows at the sports arena that were WWF major league company, and now you're seeing this other league in XPW, but in that same venue. What did that feel like to you?
It was pretty darn cool. I mean, you were at the LA Sports Arena, but it was just a different vibe. It had a different feel when you sat down there and everything started. You had Guido on the microphone and everything. It was a little different. You knew you were on to something that had a niche of its own. Like a lot of people compare XPW to ECW, and while there might have been a little slight bit of that vibe, it was different than anything else.
Okay, yeah, and it was It was very interesting because I think the sports arena and the Olympic were very important to kind of almost in a sense that in itself got the league over. Like the sports arena was almost a gimmick in itself for the league, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely. And the crowds, just one other thing I got to say, I was, for what was going on in Southern California at the time, the XPW shows at the LA Sports Arena by far blew anything else away that was going on at the time. Like, I mean, the crowds were 3, 4, 5 times the size of any other show I'd been to.
it was a different time for sure, and I remember going out to the ring like, whew, you felt it was pretty electric and it was strong. It was a heavy energy, and I remember just watching a mid card match, let's say John Cronus and Dynamite D, and it's like, man, the fans back then were just screaming and hollering like it was the biggest deal in the world. And this is just an XPW mid card match, you know what I mean? And say in the year 2000, it was a crazy time in wrestling. And you add to that this mystique and grittiness of XPW getting again into this venue. So as a fan, you're like, wow, this is, I don't know what this is, but it's something here, right?
Absolutely. I think from top to bottom, the shows were just spectacular. I think, you said, you had mid card matches like with Cronus and Dynamite D. I mean, Dynamite D, Darren was just, I'm sure we'll cover this later, but Darren was over. He was over, and while he may have been a mid card act at the time, he was definitely someone who grabbed my attention from the beginning.
Yeah. And then once, of course, once you get to know him, you can't help to see, boy, this guy's the main event as far as minds go in the business.
100%, absolutely.
Now, okay, we'll fast forward a little bit here, Melikian, Eric Melikian, referee extraordinaire, to to the fact that you. So this is back in 2000. You were still high school, going to these shows. Fast forward, I think you began working before you refed for XPW. You became security, kind of ring crew, kind of that. You paid your dues in the beginning, and you got in that way, correct?
Well, yeah, to a point, I was more of an outsider. Alex Knight, the guy who broke me into the business, Kevin Kleinrock had contacted him because they started renting out his ring for the shows, starting at, the Olympic Auditorium for the Genocide show, I believe, with the 2 rings.
Yep.
And yeah, so I got in that way. I was pretty much an outsider with Alex and his ring crew, just setting up, paying my dues, and I was kind of from the outside looking in when I got into it.
So just to recap, and that's actually pretty interesting because we'll probably segue that into the Wrestling Chatter's other series eventually, Cali's Finest, and probably have Alex Knight on as a guest. Alex Knight was the guy who supplied XPW rings at times when they needed an extra one, and with
Absolutely.
the ring crew and all that. But Alex Knight is, again, a guy that has a long stemmed history in professional wrestling, California, but everywhere. He wrestled in the AWA, WWF, and all over the world. You can say enhancement talent for a lot of that time, but at the same time, he was in the ring with all the Harley Races, the Shawn Michaels, and the list goes on and on. So yeah, kind of a good person to get your start in this business. A guy that's been done it all pretty much.
Really great guy, but very old school. And if kind of, I had to figure along the way. He kind of helped guide me, but along the way I had to pick up some things on my own, because he was one of those guys where it's like he just didn't give everything to you. Like, he wanted you to see it for yourself, and he respected the old school traditions. And I think still to this day, to a point, it's hard for him to kind of break that.
A lot of the guys too, and that's not a bad thing a lot of the time. And in my opinion, it's primarily a good thing. It kind of keeps things in perspective as far as And I know you have this similar school of thought, or you agree with it, which is it's the old school, it's the kayfabe, it's the
Yeah,
going back to basics, why things work, why things don't work, and not kind of like just not forgetting that about that, you know.
absolutely. Even though things evolve, it's like the basics still to some degree always stay the same.
Yeah, and they kind of have to, you know, you can't. In a lot of ways, that foundation needs to kind of stay there, and then you can kind of manage things on top of that foundation that shouldn't be rocked. And that foundation, as far as pro wrestling goes, is the illusion, the kayfabe. That's the foundation. That's the reason it exists. And it's like a magic show. The reason it exists is because the crowd believes the magic. That's the
Absolutely.
foundation. Yeah, and then the different tricks come on top of it. You know. Um, so so you got in through Alex and the ring and all that. Now, were you working security back in, let's say, the Pico Rivera era, like '02, right before we went to East Coast, Philadelphia?
I pretty much was just ring crew, and we stayed around for the shows. And if there was anything needed during the shows as far as the ring, we were there to take care of that. But other than that, just the ring. I never worked security or anything like that.
Okay, gotcha. Your thoughts now, we'll fast forward um, because you're involved now, like you were at Cold Day in Hell, like you were at the 10 year, like you were with MEXPro, and now leading up to the XPW 3.0. Um, but at the time, you're a young kid, you're starting up, you don't really know him yet. But at the time, your thoughts on Rob Black?
Rob Black was definitely the ultimate heel. When I saw him enter the sports arena, he came out to the Metallica music and had the Black Army. Like, it was something different. It was something different than what WWE was doing, WCW, or even ECW, who was nearing the end at the time. It was just totally something different on another level. And I might say, next to a very few select others, he was probably the top heel in professional wrestling, at least in my eyes at the time.
And a good argument for that, whether you agree with that or not, is we had John Weber, his stepfather, on the show, and he actually brought up an interesting point that I didn't ever really think of it consciously, but once he said it, it made sense. And I think we talked about this off camera, which was like Vince McMahon came out and pretended to be that guy, you know. Paul Heyman came out, pretended to be that guy. Eric Bischoff came out, pretended to be that guy. Rob Black, if you know who he is, that's the guy. There really wasn't much separation from working and shooting as far as Rob Black was concerned. If Rob Black came out the curtain and he was saying all these things and doing all this stuff, went back behind that curtain and he was still doing all these things. Like he wasn't exactly the same, but he was very close. And so I think with that, I don't know if that's where you were going, but I want, when you say he was a great heel, I know what you mean. And those of us that know
Well,
him,
he was a great heel because he just knew how to get great heel heat. When he was out there, for some reason, people loved to hate him, and he knew how to say things that would get people to hate him.
100%. And that I think is an extension of the reason why that was the case, was because, man, he just had the freedom to kind of say what he wanted to say, and he wasn't playing a role in so many ways. Like, it was a lot of his personality was there, where I've met Eric Bischoff and I've met, Vince, and I know enough about Paul Heyman. I don't think I've ever met Paul Heyman, but I know enough to know that was, you got to turn yourself on, now turn yourself off. And Rob was like, he came back out of the curtain, he was still doing all this stuff, and that's how he was. And so I think Stepfather kind of connecting the dots with that was very informative.
It's one of those things too. You got to have the it factor. Like, To truly get over, you got to have the it factor. You got to be comfortable in front of people. It's just, there's so many intangibles to how to get over like that.
So true. So true. Um, Let me ask you that. Oh, okay. So then now, so you were working ring crew and all that. Then that was it. XPW didn't close shop, but kind of closed its doors at the time on Southern California, which was a little controversial for the fans. Talk about that a little bit, because I remember at the time almost feeling bad personally. Like, I'm from LA and I've been a part of this, and we just kind of had this opportunity to go to the East Coast. And I don't know if we couldn't do it, but I would have loved to have been, okay, 1 month East Coast, 1 month West Coast, 1 month East Coast. But for all intents and purposes at the time, it was like, that's the way it's going to be for now. And I personally couldn't say anything on TV. Wouldn't have made sense, right? But I was like, I feel like we're being dicks to the LA crowd that's been so loyal and basically has built us, right? Now, as a fan, how did you view that when you saw, what, no more shows in LA, you're just going to be on the East Coast, even though television was here, no live shows?
That was interesting. The whole time that you guys were on the East Coast, you guys always aired TV in LA, and there was always that big question mark if you guys were coming back or not. It was one of those things where it's like, and I know you would throw out little things about LA and try to put it over all the time, from what I remember, and when you could. But it was one of those things where it seemed like a big question mark. Like, is XPW coming back, or are they going to be staying on the East Coast for good?
Yeah, it was, there was a little bit of resentment, and I can understand it from the LA fan base a little bit at the time. Did you feel a little bit of that when you were, from yourself or from other people that you knew were XPW fans?
A lot of people I talked to and just watching, I noticed the roster seemed to change. There was a shift in talent. Like, a lot of the guys that you saw, like the Dynamite D's, the Steve Rosanos, and I'm trying to think who else, the Scott Snots to the Crimsons, they were there. Then all of a sudden there was this new shift coming in,
Right.
which was a lot of the older guard from ECW.
Yes. The Danny Dorings, the Chris Chettys, all the super crazy, no complaints. But none of the guys I'm complaining about. But yes, it was starting to feel a little bit more, when XPW started, we had the ECW guys there, but we always infused the ECW guys there, but we always infused the XPW to build our own identity. And once we did that, when we went to the East Coast, it's kind of like we somewhat forgot that a little bit, and we just adopted the ECW guys again. And then it was starting to feel a little bit more generic at the time. It wasn't feeling like XPW. It was beginning to feel like ECW light a little bit. And XPW wasn't that at its core, but I felt we were a little bit making the mistake of becoming that. And I don't know if a lot of that had to do with Shane Douglas's booking decisions and how he was involved with Rob and Kevin. I'm not sure exactly. I can't quite remember those details, but I know it probably had something to do with that.
But in hindsight as well, it's one of those things, looking back too, it's like, that's the way you look at it. But now it's like, okay, they had to do certain things because they were trying to get to that next level, and that's what they thought at the time they needed to do.
And I can understand that too. Yeah, and it was a new fan base on the East Coast that you kind of got to cater to with that old ECW guard a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. But that's a great segue into when you guys did come back to LA. While you brought a lot of the former ECW crew in, you brought in back a little bit of the LA flavor for the last few shows.
Yeah, that's true. And that was kind of a breath of fresh air, at least for me at the time. Do you, Melikian, have any favorite standouts Any favorite standouts, people, and what are some of your favorite standout matches that you remember of Extreme Pro Wrestling?
Wow, we're going back to the beginning here. Damian Steele, the real deal Damian Steele, stood out to me right from the beginning. The guy just looked like a polished professional.
But by the way, oh, never mind. Today, no, I'm sorry. Today's Thursday. We're taping this. I thought it was Wednesday for a second. Never mind. Let's see if any of you fans know what we're talking about relating to the real deal Damian Steele and relating to the day Wednesday. Drop that in the comment. I'd love to see if that's a little trivia for you fans. If you can relate Wednesday and Damian Steele, hey, you could be the first and win the guessing game there. So yeah, but yeah,
yeah, he stood out right from the beginning. I mean, he looked like someone. Wow, this is someone I could see on TV, every Monday night. Like he just stood out to me just right away as someone who was on another level from everyone else. He just looked, act, and seemed the part.
Yeah, he was
just that guy you love to hate as well.
Yeah, and
predating Rob Black and hit Rob's involvement on screen.
True, because before the Black Army, it was Damian Steele and the Hierarchy. That was kind of the big evil faction, the Four Horsemen of XPW at the time. So that was and throughout XPW after your Damian Steeles. Like, do you have like a top, let's say 3 or 5 guys that you can kind of like, you know what, Damian Steele and then maybe a few others throughout time that of all the guys, the roster, who are some, let's say a handful that you really liked and stood out to you?
Wow, there's quite a few guys. I'd say Dynamite D for sure. Absolutely 100%. Angel was great. Him and his interaction with Crack was just, it was awesome. I just thought they had a great thing going. And a few other guys. I mean, Scott Snott, I think he got over for a while there before the whole, you guys shifting over to the East Coast. I think he, can't forget him. And of course, Webb, that was another person. Like, we were talking about this earlier. When you guys went to the East Coast, Webb was a guy that just seemed very absent.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, him. Of course, Jimmy left prior to us going back east, but I think both those guys kind of felt the void not having him there at that time.
And absolutely, Jimmy's another guy. He was someone in the LA shows I remember specifically, like at the Grand Olympic Auditorium, and even predating that over at Birmingham High School. Someone who was over to the maximum level.
Were you there at the sports arena when him and Cronus went at it, when Jimmy came off the second balcony of the sports arena?
Yes, I was. That was insane. Yeah, I remember that.
Definitely nothing has ever been done like that at that arena. And that arena was built in the 50s, and that was nothing had ever been done at that arena. I guarantee you, up until that
probably since until they tore it down, probably nothing has happened like that.
Jimmy is the one guy. Yeah, he should be proud of that.
And there's another guy I can't leave out. Tool was another guy. The character, the whole mystique, and just his stature and everything stood out to me. I remember at the Go Funk Yourself show when he came out to help Sabu at the end of it. I think he helped Sabu, if I remember correctly. He came out, and there was kind of a stare down between the two of them at the end, and you could just feel the energy at that moment. And I was thinking that something was building up there with the two of them.
Dude,
at that point, and you knew he was going to that next level.
Yeah. You know what's funny about that? Okay, so that was leading up to the main event. Of course, the main event was Terry Funk, Sabu. Already a big match. So people were already, woo, this is a big deal. And then, there were the promos. The Black Army came out, Lazy, Rivera, and I in the beginning. And then there was a moment where there was a whole melee in the ring, and Sabu and was getting attacked, and Tool came out, and they were basically getting rid of the Black Army. And then the two bumped backs, and then they came face to face. And this was leading up to the main event, middle of the show, whenever it was, right? And it was like I don't even think we knew how like big that moment was going to feel when we planned it out in the back. Like it was, like you said, it was, oh, this feels, because Tool's this unbeatable guy, mysterious, and Sabu is just world renowned. No one can beat him. And when they came together, it's a little Ultimate Warrior Hulk Hogan feel, or a Hogan
Yeah,
Andre feel. Yes. Yeah.
it was great.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, because that's a big moment that I think gets lost. There's a lot of little moments that were impactful, and that was one of them.
Absolutely. And also too, I got to include you in the mix. Like once the TV hit the air and you and Larry Rivera doing your guys' thing, like you literally were a big part, integral part of me as a fan at the time, being able to follow along week to week and looking forward to watching the show very late on a Saturday night.
Oh, dude, I appreciate that, man. I really do. Thank you very much, Eric. So
You're too humble.
no, man, I appreciate it. Thank you, and shout out to Rivera too. Thanks for including him there.
Absolutely.
And I guess Guido, you picked him out of the hat too. So we gotta, I guess, throw his name in there, Guido.
Throw him a little bone, right?
Yeah, I guess so. Click on and see how you do with him if you could stomach it, fans. But anyway, uh, so okay, so we come back from Philly, and that was kind of a big moment, because 2003, X Park, San Fernando Valley. That was when XPW came back to the West Coast, and it was a breath of fresh air for a lot of us in the back, and of course the fans. And you were involved in those shows too, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, and that was through helping with the ring and all that, right? And just kind
Yeah,
of,
whatever we needed, help bringing in merchandise boxes, whatever they needed for those shows over at X Park.
okay, so that basically was it. That was it for not the last show, but it was the last show in LA, and then we went to Pittsburgh, which ended up being the last show. So fast forward, XPW was done. I start doing shows like a lot of us did, and that's when you and I and Dynamite D, Danny Ramirez, Patrick Hernandez, kind of all clicked and became friends. And I don't know if your introduction was through me or if it was through Danny or Patrick, since you were reffing. So when did you start refereeing? What year?
I started refereeing in late 2003. I did some street fair shows for Alex Knight that featured, guys that went on to be the Miz. I worked with him one time. It was very brief. I worked with, was it Super Genie, who recently passed away? She wrestled at the time. This was all through the UPW connection, because the Ballard brothers worked all those shows, who were trained by Alex as well. And they brought a lot of those students in to work the shows just to cut their teeth and kind of get some experience in front of a live crowd.
When did you first work with guys like Danny, Patrick, myself, and Patrick Hernandez, Danny Ramirez, myself, and Dynamite D? Do you remember that?
I would say my first introduction to the XPW crew was with Darren Dynamite D back in, was it July or August of 2004, when Johnny promoted Hybrid Pro Wrestling over at the El Patero nightclub in Cudahy.
Oh, you're talking about Johnny Nightmare.
Yeah.
Okay,
a favorite
right.
of a buddy of ours. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So now we're kind of all hanging out, we're clicking, and you, myself, Danny, we start doing some shows out in Lancaster, which we talked about when Danny Ramirez was on. Out up in Lancaster, we started promoting our own league, our own show, which ended up kind of unofficially becoming the Farm League Developmental League for Wrestling Society X. And we were doing TV spots up in Lancaster. Was that helpful to you? You were kind of cutting your teeth a little bit, getting to not only work as a ref, but seeing kind of how it worked backstage and all that?
Absolutely. I would say that was my first glimpse to see not just how things worked the day of the show, but leading up and just seeing how everything was put together. Basically just listening to you, Patrick, Danny, Darren, Rob Praise,
Oh
and a
yeah.
few other guys. Yeah, like it was basically my introduction to like just how the little things work in this business behind the scenes that a lot of people don't know about. It's an art form in itself. It takes a huge thought process, and not everyone's cut out to do it, unfortunately.
That's true. Yeah. So this was in about 2005, 2006. Now we fast forward to 2007. You actually almost um, worked Wrestling Society X, but something happened and it was just the way it was. And there was a possibility for you to get on season 2. And of course, we all know that the rest is history. It never happened. But shortly after Wrestling Society X, MTV went off the air. Big Vision Entertainment had an opportunity because they now own the rights to XPW, and a lot of us were working at Big Vision Entertainment. Now, Cold Day in Hell, we had an opportunity to do a reunion show, which happened in May of 2008. Talk a little bit about that and how you got involved, what your role was, and the reason why it was held where it was.
Well, I remember you telling me that, there's rumblings about, Big Vision wanting to bring XPW back. And I know we were just talking casually and thinking about possible locations and venues. And I just brought up, because I told you previously, another wrestling company ran a small little show at Aviation Gym in Redondo Beach, maybe about 3 or 4 years prior. And I didn't find out until after the fact. It was down the street from where I lived.
Okay.
And I remember we started talking about it. And then from there, I remember you talked to Kevin and Mike Hartsfield about it. And it just kind of took a life of its own after that.
Yeah, so that took place in May 24th of 2008. Now, you had a big role behind the scenes. You were helping out a lot more extensively than you were back in the early 1.0 XPW. Can you talk about a little bit about your role and how you kind of helped out with the behind the scenes stuff, and also talk about your match, because you refed a pretty big match on that show?
Well, I got to hand it to you, Kris. Without you, kind of going to bat for me, I would have never met Kevin. I would have never met Mike Hartsfield. And, I did help out trying to get the venue for Aviation Gym. I contacted the people that worked there. But really, all in all, that show, Cold Day in Hell, is the show that kind of got me to the next level as far as, probably up to that date, absolutely my biggest booking up to that point.
And that was Sandman and Pogo.
Yes, Sandman. I worked with Sandman and Pogo and ended up driving Hack around for the better part of the weekend.
You want to talk a little bit about that? Any fun stories?
Yeah, I
there?
don't mind at all. I ended up picking him up from the airport and taking him to the hotel. Then after we checked into the hotel, he started talking to me about, 9/11 conspiracy theories, and just kind of spawned off, started talking from there. He was a great guy to talk to. I had talked to him about just different things about the business, and he was very great to, talk to and deal with, an ultimate pleasure.
I remember that story about the 9/11 stuff. Interesting stuff, by the way.
Yeah.
But his priority of having to show you the footage at the hotel or something like that.
Yes,
right?
absolutely. Telling the guy at the front desk, hey, can I use your computer for a minute? I need to show this guy something. And he's like getting on the computer and literally showing me what he wanted to show me. And I'm spending like about 10 minutes doing it.
So Cold Day in Hell was a success. Fortunately, it happened right around the time of the crash of 08. So, but a year later, we did XPW 10, XPW X, the 10-year anniversary reunion in 2009. I want to say you were a little bit more hands-on with this show, right?
Yes, I helped Mike, as far as just kind of scouting out venues and just kind of seeing how the layout of things go. Like he taught me a lot about lighting and how he likes to set things up. And Kevin was there discussing about how, what they wanted to do camera wise for the show. Like a lot of people just go to a show and don't realize the thought process when it comes to everything. And
Right.
I think guys like Mike and Kevin don't get quite the just due they deserve, because they work extremely hard, diligently, day in and day out, like whether back in the day in the original XPW or trying to get these shows going for Big Vision at the time.
Right. So XPW 10 was what it was. It wasn't as grandioso as Cold Day in Hell because we didn't have as much Big Vision entertainment involvement, but we pulled it off. Now, when Big Vision shut its doors, uh, so were the doors shut on anybody wanting to do anything with XPW because the doors were shut. So it was basically lying dormant. Now we moved ahead, and Mike Hartsfield had an idea of doing something called MEXPW, MEXPW, and it was kind of an offshoot of XPW, using some of the talent, but maybe including some lucha stuff as well. So the name was perfect. Then there was a legal battle. It was a lawsuit between Big Vision and Mike Hartsfield because the similarities of MEXPW and XPW, and it was like, I don't know who would win this, but eventually Mike Hartsfield had to change the name from MEXPW to MEXPro. Mike put a lot of work into this. So did you. So did myself. So did a lot of people. Talk a little bit about yourself having a hand in MEXPW/MEXPro.
I remember when Mike had the idea, I know he came to you about it originally, then included me into the small circle about that. And I thought it was a great idea. And I think along the way, there was some political things that got in the way and a couple controversies with the promotion that we won't discuss, that it kind of shook the foundation of what Mike was trying to do. But in the fashion of the original XPW, it was that rebellious kind of, we're doing our own sort of thing, which I thought was awesome for the time. And I really think it did have some legs to stand on, given that.
What was
Because
your
people were talking about it one way or another, people were discussing it.
and we did shows in Hollywood. We did shows in different places. Um, this was, again, you were heavily involved. You were reffing, but you were also again, you had your hand in this, booking um, venues and all of this. You want to talk a little bit about that, because now you kind of had experience in doing this when we started at GXW, Cold Day in Hell, XPWX, and you were also on your own doing a ton of shows. So your involvement with talk a little bit about you behind the scenes during that time.
Well, I remember at the beginning, Mike had a little tryout camp over at the Santino Brothers Wrestling School, where he was looking for some local talent to intertwine, with some of the guys that he was going to have come down from Mexico, and just other, former XPW guys and other guys that kind of had a name for themselves, around United States and the whole world, basically internationally. And from there, we scouted out talent. We picked out a few guys to be on the first show. And I'd say the biggest acquisition that I brought to the table was Gabriel Gallo from Arizona, when he wrestled the Almighty Sheik on that show. And I don't take credit for it, because Gallo is one of those guys, I still think to this day, kind of like a prospect that's kind of been lurking in the shadows and hasn't gotten his just due that he deserves. Like, he's someone that I could see in an AEW, a WWE, or even, maybe in XPW now.
Yeah, 3.0. I was just going to say that. Well, I mean, it's kind of interesting looking at the history, looking at your involvement, because
You were there in the very beginning. You finally did get involved, and that was the paying your dues era, similar to what I used to do in Slammers and SCCW, and in the early days too of XPW a little bit. But so you were doing that, and you became part of the history with 2.0, with MEXPro, and now, of course, we're going into this. Again, we started Xtreme Memories. No one had a clue that it was coming back. So this is all very interesting to all of us. Now,
and you play, and you know what? I don't think you get enough credit. You play a big part in all this too.
Oh, thank you, man. I appreciate that, Eric. Thank you, dude.
And honestly, just this whole podcast does. It's kind of recreated a bit of a buzz, and
it's a lot of fun, man. It's been great reconnecting with, man, just about everybody I've had on the show. Almost everybody I've had on the show are people that I have not talked to in years. There's a few of us that we keep in contact, but I'd say 90% of the people on the show is some people I haven't talked to. So this has been really great. And like we said on our best of episode, there are others that have been on the show that are connecting amongst themselves outside of me, that this show has been getting people reconnected. So it's very cool. I'm happy to be part of that. Thank you for bringing that up, man. Melikian, we've almost gone an hour here, and before I get to my last question, is there anything else that you can think of that you want to talk about as far as your involvement, as far as XPW itself, your involvement with XPW? Anybody that you can think of that you want to talk about, or any situations, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, I mean, I'll be honest, up to my involvement in wrestling up to this point, a lot of the XPW crew from back in the day are the guys that I have to thank for my career, essentially. You, Patrick Hernandez, who's been very, as far as refereeing and just the little intricacies and the little facets a lot of people don't know about this business, have helped guide me so much. Mike Hartsfield, Kevin Kleinrock, who's given me opportunities even out of state with like Dragon Gate USA, and Dynamite D, Darren, the late great Dynamite D. Without him and him kind of guiding me through the psychology of the business, I don't think I'd know half of what I do now, especially looking back 15, 16 years when I was just a young rookie, trying to find his way through this crazy business. So I thank all you guys for everything you've done for me. And without you guys, I don't think I'd still be in this today.
Well, you better include another name or you're never going to hear the end of it, man. The love child of Joe Pesci and Cheech Marin.
Danny Ramirez. Yeah, he's great too, man. One of the best referees. Like I tell people, him and Patrick Hernandez, the best referees to ever come out of Southern California. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Or should I say senior official of XPW, Danny Ramirez.
That's right, of XPW, senior official 3.0. That's true. Okay, man. So I throw this question out to all the guests, Eric, Melikian, and that is, you're a fan. I'm a fan. Prior to us getting involved in the business, and prior to us getting involved in XPW or any family connected league to XPW 1, 2, 3.0 and all throughout the history, in your mind, in the scope of the world of professional wrestling, what is and will be the legacy of XPW, Extreme Pro Wrestling?
XPW was the company that was badass. It was different than what everybody else was doing. I think from beginning to end, they were the rebels of the business, the outlaws, so to speak. And for the most part, when people think of XPW, they think of the guys that you just see at XPW. You had to come to an XPW show to see them, because if you didn't see them there, you wouldn't see them anywhere else. And for people that weren't at the original XPW back in the day, if you have never been to an XPW show, there was just a little sense of, I don't know if uneasiness is the word, but there was a sense of, something badass was going to happen tonight. There's going to be maybe a little bit of danger. And it was something, if you've ever been to a wrestling show, you would not see anywhere else.
That's a good way to put it. I mean, that was honestly how, not just from the fans' perspective, that's how a lot of us felt when we got there that night. We felt that way, that this is something might happen that's not supposed to happen. That's something wrong. Feels like something wrong could very well happen here tonight. To the point where I think that led to that kind of, that gave that energy, that rabid fan, that added a little bit of that, pumped that into the water supply of it being kind of on the edge of your seat and wild.
Absolutely. I still think potentially the best has yet to come.
Okay, well, dude, man, that would be great for a lot of people, and hopefully as some of the young guys starting up right now. Like one cool story, which does tie in, and it's, we're not purposely plugging anything here because the show already happened, but one cool thing about the Rochester show of Rebirth was they kind of tied in to the story of Willie Mack. And Willie Mack's been on TNA, he's been on television, he's done a lot. But when he got there, he really felt like, you could tell like that was special to him, because he was a little kid going to XPW. He would hang out at the parking lot, take the bus in. He had a couple cents to his name, and he would wait for autographs and all that. So for guys like him, and even younger than him, I hope you're right that this will be an opportunity for a lot of young guys starting up in the business.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You couldn't say it any better than how you said it.
It's true, and we'll only time will tell, man. I'll see you out there April 9th, and it should be good. It should be fun. And again, we're not using this show is about the old XPW. I just want to make that clear. Anything you want to say, man? Melikian, by the way, thank you, brother, for being on the show.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm not a tool. I'm not an angel. I'm not, a Mike Hartsfield, a Kevin Kleinrock, or Patrick Hernandez, but I truly appreciate you having me on and getting the fan perspective of the old XPW.
I agree with you, Eric. You're a good guy, and you're definitely not a tool. I don't know what the hell he said. I'm not a tool. I don't know. Hey, but hey, before we sign off, Melikian, do you have any shout outs, any plugs, or anything you want to say to anybody out there?
Well, I would just say check out thexpwwrestling.com for further updates, and be sure to check out the Wrestling Chatter.
Thank you, man. All right, man. For everybody here at the Wrestling Chatter YouTube channel, we'll see you next time on the next episode of Xtreme Memories. For my guest, Eric Melikian, referee extraordinaire, my name is Kris Kloss, and we will see you right here next time on Xtreme Memories. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching Xtreme Memories, hosted by Kris Kloss. He's dropping new episodes every month on the 15th and 30th. You can be the first to tune in by subscribing to the Wrestling Chatter channel right here on YouTube. See you next time.